So when do you go from being a beginner guitar player to an intermediate guitar player? Hey guys, I'm Brad from simpleguitar.com, and that's what we are talking about today. Because here's the thing, a lot of people think it's only to do with what you know on the guitar. And that's not always the case. So we are going to talk about a list of things that most guitar players are going to need to know to move from being beginner to intermediate. But there's one key thing that we're going to talk about at the end of the video that is going to be the biggest telltale sign of whether you've moved from being a beginner to being an intermediate player. So make sure you stay tuned for that. Now let's dive in and talk about what are the things that anybody who's going from beginner to intermediate, what are the things that most guitar players are going to need to know? Mind you, this list is really kind of subjective because it's going to depend on what style of music you're playing and all that fun stuff. I was just talking to a guy the other day who's been playing for years, and he plays a lot of stuff, and he said, I don't know how to do strum patterns. But for me, I'm like, hey, that's one of the things that's one of the most fundamental things that you need to know. But it just doesn't come up in the kind of music that he plays a lot. So keep in mind, this list is subjective. There's things that you can add and remove from this list, but the key is going to be that thing that we're going to talk about at the very end. Now, as far as what you need to know as a beginner to move on to being an intermediate player is open chords. Most guitar players start out with open chords. I actually don't start my students out with open chords. Why? Because they're hard. Because you have to coordinate multiple fingers to do stuff all at the same time when you're trying to get used to this weird position of holding a guitar and pressing down on the strings. I find that difficult for most students, and I think that's one reason why so many people quit playing guitar in the first place. But to go from being a beginner to an intermediate player, you do need to know your open chords, right? You need to know G and D and C and E minor and A minor and A and B7 and all the different variations of those chords. There's about 20 open chords that I think every beginner should know. And I'll put a link to where you can download a PDF with all those on it in the description below. So if you want that, it'll be in the description below. Go download that for free, okay? Make sure you know those open chords. That means whenever you're learning a song and you see that chord pop up, you know what the name of that chord is, you know what the finger shape is, and that means that you have it memorized and you can make that chord without having to look it up or without having to stop and go, oh, that and that and that. Now I have my D chord, right? You got to make sure that you know those chords so when they pop up, you're good to go, okay? Do you need to learn all of those at once? Not necessarily, but you need to be familiar enough with them because they're going to pop up in millions and millions of songs as you're learning and playing more stuff. Now, when it comes to playing open chords, there's different things that you need to be able to do. One, you need to be able to strum, right? You need to be familiar with different strum patterns. At least this was one of the first things that I learned, and I play a lot of different stuff. I play a lot of classic rock, a lot of I've played in country bands, I've played in rock bands, I've played in alternative bands, I played in jazz band all through high school, right? Strum patterns and being able to play rhythm on guitar is super important to me, and I work my students on it a lot. So I want you to be familiar enough with strum patterns in 4/4 time and 3/4 time that you can play just about any strum pattern using eighth notes, quarter notes, half notes, whole notes when it comes to doing your strumming. Now, along with strumming, I like to have people be able to do finger picking. I think that's one of the most important things for people to be able to do because even if you're not playing a ton of stuff, you'll find, you know, a lot of the hardest rock bands will still have a song with finger picking, you know, and it's great to be able to do. For me, I actually started playing guitar because of Blackbird by the Beatles. So when I started, this was my main goal, was to be able to play this song. And that's not the case for everybody, I get that. But here's the thing, being able to use the finger picking is going to give you more variety, more sonic options for you to be able to play and to be able to make a lot of good music with, okay? So don't overlook finger picking. Now this one's kind of a bonus, but I think that you should also be able to arpeggiate with your pick. So it's basically finger picking with your pick and playing chords as arpeggios. So just taking your open chords and playing stuff like this. I think that's good too, okay? So when it comes to knowing your open chords, you need to be able to strum, you need to be able to finger pick, and you need to be able to arpeggiate with your pick, do some picking pattern stuff, okay? How familiar with all that do you need to be? You need to be familiar enough with it that you're not stopping to look things up or to figure out and get your fingers placed in the right place. That way, when you are playing a song, you're not stopping, or when you're jamming with other people, they're not having to stop to wait for you, okay? You want to make sure that you know that well enough that your changes are starting to smooth out and you're starting to get stuff pretty darn good. Now, on top of your open chords, you also need to know power chords. Now, in standard tuning, the first power chords that you need to know are your open power chords. You need to know your open E, which is just your first finger on the second fret of your fifth string and playing your open E string with it. And then your open A, which is just shifting your finger down towards the floor string and playing your open A string and your first finger on the second fret of your fourth string. And then your open D is moving your fingers one more time. So your first finger's on your third string, second fret, and you're playing your open D string as well. There's tons of cool songs that you can play with those. You can play bluesy stuff. You can get into playing all sorts of fun stuff. In fact, if I were starting students out in standard tuning, I would have them do that, but I don't. My students start out in drop D tuning, which is where you take your low E string and we tune it down to a D note like that. And that way you have an open power chord just by playing your lowest sounding three strings, your sixth string, your fifth string, and your fourth string. And then you can take your first, second, or third finger, lay them flat across those three strings on any fret, and you have a power chord anywhere you want. The cool thing about that is you can play any song with those power chords in any key. So I have beginners doing that all the time. And in fact, the first day of lessons, what we usually do is we play The Middle by Jimmy Eat World, where it's open. And then the seventh fret, and then the fifth fret, and then the open again. And that's most of the song, okay? It's super easy. You can take tons of songs to do that. But on top of that, so we've got your open power chords in standard tuning. You've got drop D power chords. You also need to know your standard 2 and 3 string power chords. Now I'm going to tune back up to standard tuning for this. Now, your standard 2 and 3 string power chords are going to look like this. You have a root note that names whatever chord it is you're playing. So whatever note your first finger plays is what chord you're playing. So for example, I'm going to put my first finger on the 7th fret of my 6th string, which is a B note. So this is going to be a B power chord. And then I'm going to put my 3rd finger on the 9th fret of the 5th string. So next string, 2 frets higher. That right there is a B chord, right? So if you play those two together, you got a 2-string power chord, and you can play cool stuff like this. Right? Really handy. But we can expand that by adding your pinky into the equation. And we can do your first finger on 7. We can do your 3rd finger on 9 on your 5th string and add your pinky to the 4th string on the same fret as your ring finger. And we have a 3-string power chord. And then we have... The cool thing about these 2 and 3-string power chords is they are a movable shape, okay? So as long as your first finger is on whatever fret and your 3rd and 4th finger, right, will stay 2 frets higher on the next 2 strings, you have a movable shape that you can play at any fret. So once you get it down somewhere, you can get it down everywhere. But here's the cool thing. You can do that on your 6-string root, and you can shift down strings and do it on your 5th string. So you get stuff like this. If you know that song, let me know down in the comments. High five if you get it, okay? So power chords and open chords are super important to know. Now, the next thing that I think every beginner should know is at least 2 of the possible 5 different bar chords that you can play. Now, I think that every beginner should be able to play E shape and A shape bar chords. I've done different videos on these. I can put a link down in the description for these if you want to check those out later. But E shape bar chords are basically where you take your E chords, your E open chords, and you can move that shape up the fretboard like this, and you lay your first finger down, and it bars the open strings, and now you have a movable shape that we can move this to any fret, and you have 12 different bar chords. Now, with that, you have your major chord, your minor chord, your seventh chord, and your minor seventh chord. And I think you should know all 4 of those. Same thing with your A-shaped bar chords. A-shaped bar chords are based on your open A chord. And you move that shape up, and you bar it. Now, I bar the strings with my first finger, and then I bar the A shape with my third finger because I'm weird like that. But for me, that's the easiest way to do it. Some people do it with 3 fingers. My fingers are just too fat. That's really uncomfortable for me, so I bar it, okay? But same thing, you need to know your major, your minor, your 7, your minor 7, and a bonus one for this because it's easier than the E shape is your major 7. That sounds jazzy, right? But same idea with your A-shaped chords. Those are movable, so you can play them anywhere on the fretboard, okay? So knowing your open chords, your power chords, your bar chords, when you're pretty comfortable with those and you're moving around, you're moving into that more intermediate area, okay? Now, what about scales? What kind of scales do you know? Well, I think that most beginners are going to need to know what I call the instant rock star scale. This was the first scale that my dad ever showed me, and it looks like this. This is the major version. A lot of people just call this the diagonal major pentatonic scale, and there's also the minor version, which looks like this. I teach that to beginners first because 1, it's easy to move around the entire neck. 2, it's super easy to get, to understand. And 3, you're going to find as you're playing a lot of solos and songs, that scale pops up all the time. I think it's the most important scale that you need to know. But on top of that, you need to know at least your minor pentatonic box shape, either in A like this, or an E. The other scale that I knew all the time was the blues scale, which is just a variation of that minor pentatonic where we add one more note to it. We go like this. Right? That was another one that I had to know. I actually had to know that to audition for jazz band when I was a kid. And that's a handy one to know. But the other ones that you need to know are at least your major scale and your minor scale. Now, your major scale, there are different forms that you can do this. You can do a 3-note per string scale, which is not what I learned first. I learned a typical, some people would call it a cage scale or a standard scale, whatever it is. It starts with your second finger, for example, for C right here. Second finger on C on my 8th fret, pinky on 10, and then on the next string, 7, 8, 10. 7, 9, 10, 7, 9, 10, 8, 10, 7, 8, 10. That's a kind of a boxy shape. It stays in one position on the neck. Or you can know your 3-note per string version of that. I actually prefer that one a lot of the time, but that's a whole other discussion. But also your minor, which minor is easier with your 3-note per string version, where what you're doing is you're playing, for example, in A minor, it's 5, 7, 8, 5, 7, 8, 5, 7, 9, 5, 7, 9, 6, 8, 10, 7, 8, 10. Most scales are way more of an intermediate thing, but that gives you a really solid foundation. And if anything, just learning the instant rockstar scale, the major and the minor version, is really going to set you up for a long time to be able to do that really, really well. Now, what about other things? What other things do you know? Well, first of all, you need to know your musical alphabet. Okay, you know your ABCs, you know A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, right? We can do that. You need to know your musical alphabet because there's only 12 notes. You know 26 letters in the English alphabet. Now you need to know 12 notes in the musical alphabet. Okay, A sharp, B, C, C sharp, D, D sharp, E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp, A. Or backwards, you can go A flat, G, G flat, F, E, E flat, D, D flat, C, B, B flat, A. Okay, you need to know that backwards and forwards. You need to know that musical alphabet. That is going to make your life easier. Your other skills that you're going to need to know on top of your musical alphabet is going to be how to read tablature, how to read rhythm sheets, how to read chord and scale diagrams, stuff like that. And at least to be able to follow along with sheet music, even if you don't read the standard notation, being able to follow sheet music is going to be really important for you. Okay. Now, when it comes to your knowledge base, that stuff, that list of stuff is going to be really good. But here is the number one key to knowing if you are going from being a beginner to being an intermediate guitar player. And that is, you no longer have to babysit your hands. Okay, now, one of my old guitar teachers said this, and I thought this was actually genius. I think it's a great way to measure if you're a beginner or intermediate, is if you're no longer having to babysit your hands by looking down at your hands all the time to make sure your changes are good, or making sure that you're hitting the right string, whatever it is that you're playing, whatever style of music it is, whatever technique you're playing, if you don't have to babysit your hands, you're no longer a beginner. So if that's you right now and you just realize, holy crap, I'm not a beginner anymore, where do I need to go next? We can talk about that in another video, but congratulations on realizing whether you are a beginner and what to shoot for about getting good enough that you don't have to babysit your hands anymore, or finding out, hey, I'm already an intermediate guitar player. I don't have to babysit my hands. Now, here's the trick. Putting a time frame on moving from beginner to intermediate is really hard because it's not about time. It's about the amount of effort that's put in over time, right? One of Jimi Hendrix's bandmates said that he put in 25 years worth of work in 5 years to his guitar playing. And that's one reason why he got so good. And the same thing goes for you. You can work harder. You can play the guitar more. You can work on fixing your mistakes and making things better. And the more that you do that, the more repetition that you get, the more effort that you put in, the faster, the shorter the time frame is that you move from beginner to intermediate. Or you can touch the guitar once a week for an hour and you'll be a beginner for years. Okay. So either way, putting a time frame on this is hard. So the better gauge is, do you still have to babysit your hands? And if so, can you do more repetitions? Can you put in more effort and work on that so that you go from being a beginner to being an intermediate player and playing more stuff and moving on to more advanced things? So that's it today, guys. I hope that was helpful for you. If you did find this helpful, I have another gift for you as well that's going to help you go from being a beginner to being intermediate a lot faster. And that is at my website. If you go to simpleguitar.com/top10, there I have a gift for you called the top 10 things to learn on guitar first. And it's 10 things that are going to get you a lot of musical bang for your buck and knowledge-wise bang for your buck. And it includes some of the stuff that we talked about today, okay? So go get that guide. It's my gift to you for watching the video today. Thank you so much. I appreciate you. So go to simpleguitar.com/top10, get that free guide, have fun with it. Now, if you want to know more about playing guitar, check out this video next, and I will see you in the next video.